If you look at 131 years to this point, we've had somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 million people that have stayed or been served by us in some fashion, whether it's a cocktail in the Bell or a dinner in the Mahogany Grill or staying here. That's a lot of people, 8 million people. That's larger than all of Denver by a long shot. And so we've had all of these people that come through. JFK did his campaign speech here for Durango in what is now the Pullman Room downstairs. And Gerald Ford has stayed here twice, and he liked it both times. We have on good account. In fact, he was having dinner with my folks, and at that time they thought it would be really a good idea to have turn-down service, but they didn't really have anybody that knew what turn-down service was. So my mom and dad kind of says, "Oh, can you excuse us for just a minute? We need to attend to something." And of course, they left the table, and President and Betty Ford were sitting there, and they go running off. They run up to the room, and they're both turning down the bed sheets and putting the mints on the pillows and doing all the things to make President and Betty Ford welcome in the hotel. Louis L'Amour, of course, wrote his Sackett books here. Will Rogers stayed here. Will Rogers, the famous theorist and poet and cowboy lasso artist and all of that, stayed here at the hotel. The Grateful Dead were here, and of course we were afraid that, you know, there would be some damage, but no, the Grateful Dead were very respectful of the Strater Hotel, and the word is that they were undiscovered in their stay, because in Durango, we're not used to having people that come here who are famous. So you can come here and be undiscovered even if you are famous, mostly. Then some of the famous things, in fact, in this very room here, when it was called the Columbian Hotel, all of the Apollo astronauts for all of the future Apollo missions had dinner here in this room. And they were on a geological training session in Durango, because we're in the middle of some of the most geologically significant areas. And the idea was that when you land on the moon and you're going to take some rocks back, you want to know what kind of rocks you're looking for. So they did this whole thing. And I got to I drove the boat up at Electra Lake and got to see Mr. Young and Schirra and all the other ones, and had a picture of them here. We had also the 6th Transatlantic Treaty signed right here in the Strater. This is a pretty big deal, because at that point, the cables that were laid all the way across the Atlantic to commit telephone communications between both sides of the Atlantic was a huge thing. And so each time they were going to lay a new cable, they had to figure out who's going to pay for how much and what size cable and all of that kind of information. So on the 6th Transatlantic Treaty, they were going to have this in New York. The previous ones had been in Versailles and Paris and London. Well, they couldn't come to an accord in New York because it was too politically charged. There were a lot of people always around them, you know, with recordings trying to figure out what was the answer going to be, who was going to pay for what. And so it fell apart. And just at the 11th hour, one of the fellows says, "You know what? I think we need to move the venue. I know this little hotel in far off Durango, Colorado, where we can go and not be bothered. Let's move there." So they called up my dad. This is in November of about 1968, I believe. And he said, "Well, sure, bring these fellows out here." There were people from Belgium and France and Germany, Italy, and they all needed interpreters. So it looked like a UN kind of a place. And there were these booths with people with their headphones on, and they were translating everything. And to make them all feel kind of like they were expected and they could have some fun, he had a rodeo put together. And the rodeo in November was more fun for the delegates than it was for the rodeo hands, because it had snowed and it was cold and it was muddy, and when you went off the horse you landed in the mud. But it was very successful for the event, and they were able to sign on and sign the 6th Transatlantic Treaty here at the Strater. So those are the kind of things that we do. We have a town that's wonderful. It supports everything that we're doing, and a place to have those kind of events.